Instagram teen accounts have automatic protections for what teens see and who can contact them, plus time management tools. And Instagram will continue adding built-in safety features to help create age-appropriate experiences. Learn more about teen accounts and Instagram's ongoing work to protect teens online at instagram.com/teen accounts.
And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. A great day when the U.S. Senate, however you see the decision they're about to make, is going to be making a decision today. Maybe not a final decision, but a very significant one historically. They're going to be voting on President Donald Trump's decision to embark on a war against Iran. An extraordinary test, the AP says, in Congress for a conflict that has rapidly spread across the entire Middle East with no clear U.S. exit strategy. The legislation, which is known as a War Powers Resolution, gives lawmakers an opportunity to demand congressional approval before any further attacks are carried out. The Senate resolution and a similar bill being voted on in the House, probably tomorrow, face unlikely paths through the Republican-controlled Congress and would almost certainly be vetoed by President Trump if they were to pass. More on that and the interesting politics of Democrats who end up favoring Trump on this issue, and a handful of Republicans who probably will oppose him. We will get to that. Also, the race is on for the federal government to have new leadership. What race are we talking about? The campaign of 2026. Yesterday was primary election day in North Carolina, in Arkansas, and most of all in Texas, where there is a big Senate race involved. Kevin Williamson, who is always hugely entertaining and has a sense of humor about these things, spent some time in Texas reporting on the primary there, which is going to a runoff, as it turns out. And Kevin Williamson will be our guest on the Michael Medved Show. Also, we will talk about the politics of the war and what that war is likely to do in shaping the upcoming midterm elections. We'll be speaking with Danielle Pletka of the American Enterprise Institute and other conservative outlets coming up later in this show. Meanwhile, the other race that is on is for the federal government to quickly get Americans out of the Middle East as the conflict with Iran expands across the region. The State Department has urged Americans from more than a dozen countries, out of more than a dozen countries throughout the region, to leave as Iran retaliates to the U.S.-Israeli strikes with attacks of its own on other nations. But doing so appears to be logistically much easier than done. What they mean doing so, getting people out of dangerous way in those countries. The department initially directed Americans to book commercial flights, but more than 6,000 flights from countries in the region have been canceled as of yesterday afternoon. Major airlines are diverting trips for at least the next couple of days because of regional instability. The situation has sparked criticism, particularly from Democrats, as to why the Trump administration didn't have a more defined plan for getting Americans in harm's way out of the area. Israel and the U.S., meanwhile, are stepping up attacks on Iran as the war enters its fifth day. This is reported by CNN and everybody else. Israeli officials said they launched a new broad wave of strikes targeting the country's leadership and security command centers. President Donald Trump yesterday said Iran's Air Force and Navy had been knocked out. Well, that's not quite the same as wiped out, but it's the same direction. The U.S. military said it had destroyed 17 Iranian ships and hit nearly, okay, are you ready? 2,000 targets. That's the U.S., not even counting what Israel has hit, which has also been hundreds of targets and maybe thousands. Meanwhile, Americans are scrambling to evacuate as the U.S. closes several embassies and reduces diplomatic staff across the Middle East. A U.S.-based human rights group also said more than 1,000 people, including children, have been killed in Iran since the fighting began on Saturday. Meanwhile, The Hill suggests that the exiled Iranian crown prince Reza Pahlavi will speak at the Conservative Political Action Conference later this month. The son of the former Shah has pitched himself as an interim leader for Iran after the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And if there is such a thing as a pro-American Iranian political figure, it is the crown prince. Reza Pahlavi is spent most of his life since 1979 in the United States, and he is someone with strong positive relations to the United States and very significantly for considering his background with Israel, where his father, the Shah, who was deposed, was a great ally of Israel in Middle Eastern politics. The CIA, meanwhile, is working to arm Kurdish forces to try to create a popular uprising against the Iranian government. CNN reported the Trump administration has been in talks with Kurds and other Iranian opposition groups about providing them military support. This could be significant with a significant and very anti-Islamist, anti-Khamenei sentiment on the part of the Kurdish population. CNN is reporting that U.S. service members, emotional tributes are pouring in after 4 U.S. service members were identified among those killed in a deadly Iranian drone strike on Kuwait. This is the first American deaths in the war with Iran. The Pentagon named the soldiers as Captain Cody Cork, who is 35, Sergeant Declan Cody, who is 20, Sergeant First Class Nicole Amor, who is 39, and Sergeant First Class Noah Tietjens, who is 42. 2 other service members killed in Sunday's strike have not yet been publicly identified. All were assigned to the Army Reserve's 103rd Sustainment Command out of Iowa and were stationed at a makeshift operation center at Shuaibah Port when a projectile broke through the air defenses. President Trump has warned that more U.S. casualties are likely as the big wave of attacks against Iran is yet to come. And meanwhile, on another front of battle, a very different front of battle from Ukraine, the Dispatch reports that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday to discuss energy security. A spokesperson said they would likely address the issue of reopening the Druzhba pipeline, an oil pipeline that Ukraine claims was damaged by Russian attacks in January, causing a shutdown that Hungary and Slovakia have accused Ukraine of prolonging, a charge that both countries have used to justify blocking greater EU aid to Ukraine, aid that is much needed right now. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz also met with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House yesterday during which he told Trump that any peace deal between Ukraine and Russia would have to allow Ukraine to preserve its territory and protect its security interests. There will be more on the latest from the war and much more about politics in this USA coming up on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, in terms of the business of Congress, not only a vote on war, or it's not a vote between war and peace, it's a vote between war and defeat. And I think we ought to make that clear. That is the vote coming up today in the U.S. Senate very soon. We will get to that. But also from Capitol Hill, the other crisis beyond the ongoing war, which, yes, is already imposing U.S. casualties, there is the headline, Lutnick to testify. The Commerce Secretary of the United States, member of President Trump's cabinet, Howard Lutnick, has agreed to testify in the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee's investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. The committee chair, James Comer, who is, of course, a Republican from Kentucky, said that Secretary Lutnick proactively agreed to appear voluntarily before the panel, saying he commends the secretary's demonstrated commitment to transparency. There's so much talk about transparency in the Epstein case, but still a lot of redacted secrets that seem to be part of it. The announcement comes after bipartisan calls for Lutnick to testify following the release of new Epstein files, and there are constantly new Epstein files. There's an inexhaustible supply, it appears. The release of new Epstein files that showed that Lutnick kept contact with Epstein much longer than he had previously said. He initially claimed to have cut ties with the disgraced financier in 2005 after he had been implicated in some of the sex abuse scandals. But emails have revealed that they remained in contact at least 7 years later, until 2012. Lutnick later confirmed that he met with Epstein that year, 2012, but said he didn't observe any illegal activity. And speaking of very legal activity, yesterday, of course, was the big primary election with most attention focused on Texas. The Real Clear Politics polling averages ahead of this first round of the primaries showed the incumbent senator, multi-term Senator John Cornyn, slightly behind his challenger and looking like he might be set up to lose. He's challenged by the GOP Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who is a favorite of President Trump, though President Trump has not made an endorsement in that race yet. But with the votes cast yesterday, and now 93% of the votes counted, it's actually Cornyn who leads Paxton, 41.9% to 40.8%. So it's terribly close. And in that situation under Texas law, they go to another round because you have to win a majority. And obviously, Senator Cornyn with 41.9% is ahead, but it's not close to a majority. The Republican Wesley Hunt was a member of Congress, was a distant third with 13.5%. But Texas law requires a runoff, which is coming up in May. A runoff in primary elections when a candidate fails to win more than 50% of the vote. So this isn't over yet. Over on the Democratic side, the Dispatch reports that Texas State Representative James Tallarico defeated U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett both of whom have been receiving a great deal of media exposure as the next hope for Democrats to actually get on the boards and score some victories in Texas, which they haven't done. Texas has been consistently electing Republican, governors and senators and mostly members of Congress. The win for Tallarico in the Democratic primary was fairly decisive. He got 53% as opposed to 45.7%, with 91% of the vote in and counted this morning. The Republican primary, that three-way race, again, Senator Cornyn was ahead, but this will go to a runoff. The scandal-plagued Paxton, reports the Dispatch, who staked out a position as one of the farthest right politicians in Texas and a Trump ally, has attacked Cornyn as insufficiently committed to the president's agenda. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reported that confusion over new voting rules in Texas's Dallas and Williamson counties caused Democratic voters to be turned away from polling sites Tuesday. As the state's primary elections unfolded, the confusion prompted a judge in Dallas to extend poll hours for the Democratic primary, but that judge's order was quickly put on hold by the Texas Supreme Court, of which John Cornyn, by the way, the incumbent senator, used to be a member of the Supreme Court of Texas. This following a request from Republican State Attorney General Ken Paxton. The whole idea is that Ken Paxton wanted Crockett to win the Democratic Party, the Democratic primary, because it's perceived that she would be the easier Democrat to beat, a more radical Bernie Sanders-oriented member of Congress. The Republican State Attorney General Ken Paxton had pushed that delay. The Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins ordered Democratic polling places in the North Texas County, which includes Dallas, to remain open 2 hours later until 9 p.m. local time. So Republican places were not affected, polling places, and they closed at 7 p.m. Meanwhile, we will speak about the more significant nationwide impact of these Texas primaries coming up with Kevin Williamson, who is inimitable and has spent some time monitoring this particular political battle. There is a report from CBS of the first sinking of an enemy ship by torpedo since World War II. Video released by the Pentagon shows the torpedo strike that sank an Iranian warship near Sri Lanka. That's roughly 1,000 miles from Iran's coastal waters in the Indian Ocean. What does this sinking mean, and what were the Iranian Navy ships doing in that part of the world so far away? We will get to that and more coming up after Kevin Williamson. Coming right up.
Medved.
This ain't Texas, ain't no hold'em. So lay your cards down, 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 down. So park your Lexus and throw your keys.
And everybody's talking Texas because of the big primary yesterday that settled. Well, what did it settle? What was the message that the voters in the Lone Star State sent to the rest of the country? To answer that question, we have the great privilege of speaking with Kevin Williamson, who is national correspondent at the Dispatch. And prior to joining the company in 2022, he spent 15 years as a writer and editor at National Review and worked as the theater critic at the New Criterion and had a long career also local newspapers. He is a writer in residence at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Well, actually, the competitive primaries on both sides of the aisle in Texas, one of them is still unsettled. What's the message that people who are voting in the Lone Star State sent to the rest of the country, Kevin?
Well, I think both parties were asked for this Senate race to choose between the relatively trollish, populist candidate who riles up the base and a relatively responsible, if maybe somewhat boring and more moderate-seeming, in many ways, candidate. And the Democrats decided to go with their relatively moderate candidate, a mild-mannered Presbyterian seminarian who is in some ways, Tallarico is his name, in some ways to the left of Jasmine Crockett on some of the issues, but he speaks in a kind of rhetorically more moderate sort of way. So it's a moderation of rhetoric more than a moderation of substance.
Yeah, when you say
and the Democrats seem to have rallied behind him.
When you say someone is a Presbyterian seminarian, that kind of indicates moderation, doesn't it?
Depends on what kind of Presbyterians we're talking about here. Presbyterians come in different flavors.
Yeah.
He is I believe, a PCUSA guy, pretty liberal Presbyterians. As a Catholic, the people I trust least are kind of liberal mainline Protestants. You're kind of bomb throwing hardcore reform types who just want to fight with me about things that happened in 1493. I have more to talk about with, it seems, sometimes. But so he's a nice liberal Presbyterian. His opponent suggested that the party would be tempted to rally behind, as she put it, and I quote, the safest white boy they could find. And it seems like that's more or less what they have done. On the Republican side, things are unresolved. It will be heading toward a primary runoff. So John Cornyn, who has been in the Senate for 24 years, he's a six-term incumbent who's a pretty conservative guy. As I pointed out in my piece, that if he'd been a senator in the Reagan years, he would have been one of the most conservative senators in the caucus. In our time, he's seen as kind of a moderate squish because he's not as much of a bomb-throwing, insult comic, very online social media troll as people would like for him to be. And, in the Republican Party, and this is true to a lesser extent, the Democratic Party, though also true, but in the Republican Party, you're largely judged by who hates you. And so Ken Paxton drives all the right people crazy. And so even though he is this wildly corrupt, scandal-plagued guy who you couldn't make – I've given up trying to write satire about this period in our history. You just couldn't make him up. I always say my favorite British political controversy was when Boris Johnson was accused of slacking on the job because he was trying to finish up the biography of Shakespeare he was writing because he needed money to pay for his divorce. That's like one that never happens in the United States. But Ken Paxton had a political controversy in which we had to answer the question, when you've been sort of outed for adultery and your estranged wife who's about to start divorce proceedings against you happens to be a state senator, does she have to recuse herself from your impeachment hearings? I think that was the first time that one had come up, and which she did. Well, she stayed on the court, but she didn't vote on the conviction. So he's a real kind of 21st century grotesque.
Well, what is Trump going to endorse him, though? That's the big question. Now, Trump hasn't endorsed either Paxton or Cornyn. And Cornyn is the more calm. He's not a centrist because he's, as you point out, deeply conservative. If you look at historical records, even in Texas, and John Cornyn, who was also at one time,
a guy like everyone else who survived in Republican politics, has become very Trumpy too. I mean, he's a Trump loyalist these days. That's not.
Yeah. So where is Trump going to go? Is it likely he endorses Paxton?
Well, trying to read Trump's mind is a dangerous thing. When you gaze into the abyss gazes into you. And so I worry about that. So I assume this is losers. I think, kind of MAGA tribalism would pull him in Paxton's direction. But I also think he's got people around him who are smart enough to say that Paxton probably is the weaker candidate in a general election, even in Texas. And with Democrats likely to take the House and have a majority come January, the likelihood of a third Trump impeachment is non-trivial. And he has to be counting senators up there. I think he wants to make sure that he holds on to every senator that he can. And I don't think he's very inclined at this point probably to take a risk on that. So I imagine that's his calculation. Do I do the MAGA thing, or do I risk losing a senator when I expect probably also to lose the House? Now, of course, it would take more than just a small Democratic majority in the Senate to impeach, convict, and remove Trump in a third impeachment. But I think even having a small Democratic majority in the Senate would inconvenience him in all sorts of other ways. Not that Congress apparently does anything anymore. So I guess we've got war in Venezuela, Iran, and Ecuador now.
What is the position of Ken Paxton on the war? Because he certainly has been identified with the more isolationist wing of the Republican Party. Is he supporting President Trump in the war in Iran?
Well, I would note that probably the most prominent spokesman for the isolationist wing of the party in public life right now has been J.D. Vance, and he's found his way around to supporting it. So, these guys all work off of the same fundamental principle, which is no principle other than Trump is right. What Trump wants, we're going to say yes to, and we'll fill it. It's like when William Jennings Bryan one time was asked about might have been free silver or something like that. And he said, well, the people are for it, so I'm for it, and I will look up the arguments later.
And, okay, so they can look up the arguments for the war.
So if Trump's for it, they're for it, and then the Heritage Foundation will think up some stuff in a month and let you know why it was really the right conservative position all along.
Okay, and then what happens? A lot of people on the Democratic side seem to want Paxton to win because they would have a better chance of beating him than they would have of beating Cornyn. Do you think that's correct?
Yeah, I think they should be careful what they wish for, because while I do think they have a better chance of beating Paxton than beating Cornyn, I don't think they've got a great chance of beating either one of them. And so, they've done this stuff before. It's been very successful. When Schumer and those guys were backing all these, really hardcore Trumpist candidates in congressional races a few years back, Democrats won those races. They succeeded by getting the most extreme candidates out there and supporting the Republicans. Whether that would work for a Senate race in Texas, I wouldn't bet my own money on it.
Okay, I'm not sure that the Stephen Colbert support for Tallarico actually is going to tip the balance in the Lone Star State. The piece is hilarious, it's insightful, and it's worth reading. It's also posted on our website at michaelmedved.com. And you can also, while you're looking at that, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Michael Medved Official. We will be right back on The Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, one of the goals of the war that we are fighting right now against the rightly designated lunatics in Iran involves destroying the Iranian Navy, which has the capacity to disrupt the oil supply, the Straits of Hormuz, all of that. And they do have a substantial navy, the nation of Iran, or they did. CBS is highlighting a video released by the Pentagon today that shows the first sinking of an enemy ship by torpedo since World War II. That's a long time ago. The video shows the torpedo strike that sank an Iranian warship near Sri Lanka. That's roughly 1,000 miles from Iran's coastal waters, way out in the Indian Ocean. And what were they doing there? The idea is that the Navy is very vulnerable, the Iranian Navy, and they were trying to get out of harm's way. That didn't work that well. This is the announcement of this encounter from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. This is clip 10.
Last night, we sunk their prize ship, the Soleimani. Looks like POTUS got him twice. Their Navy, not a factor. Pick your adjective, it is no more. In fact, yesterday, in the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win.
Okay, fighting to win against the hapless Iranian Navy. Secretary Hegseth went on to talk about the starting last night and then completed in a few days, the great success of the American Air Forces in this war, and what it means that they have achieved uncontested airspace. Again, more from Secretary of War, as he styles himself, Pete Hegseth, clip 20.
Starting last night and to be completed in a few days, in under a week, the two most powerful air forces in the world will have complete control of Iranian skies, uncontested airspace. I hope all the folks watching understand what uncontested airspace and complete control means. It means we will fly all day, all night, day and night, finding, fixing, and finishing the missiles and defense industrial base of the Iranian military, finding and fixing their leaders and their military leaders.
Okay, this is an indication which no one is really contesting, the claim of uncontested airspace, but it is an indication of showing the great success of American and Israeli efforts in the early stages of the war. Trump was asked yesterday, speaking to the media, he was asked about what the worst case would be for the war in Iran. And which is a reasonable question, because with all of the encouragement, you always have to prepare for the worst case. Here is what President Trump had to say, clip 14.
Well, I don't know if there's a worst case. We have them very much beaten militarily from the military standpoint. They're still lobbing some missiles. At some point, they won't even be able to do that because we're hitting all of their carriers. We're hitting all of their missile stock. You know, they built up all these missiles over the last few years. Yeah. They had a lot of them. They've shot a lot of them, and we're knocking out a lot. I guess the worst case would be we do this, and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen. That would probably be the worst. You go through this, and then in 5 years you realize you put somebody in who is no better. So we'd like to see somebody in there that's going to bring it back for the people.
Okay, bringing it back to the people is better than using the terminology, put somebody in there. This is not and should not be construed the way that anti-American propaganda from Iran, from Russia, from China, from North Korea, what anti-American propaganda suggests, which is that this is just an imperialist grab of power by America. It's not. The effort behind the war is to reduce the kind of danger and lunacy that Iran has displayed for nearly 50 years now, since the takeover by the Islamic fanatics in 1979. It's a very long time. And this is a point that is made forcefully by the Secretary of State, who is working to try to eliminate the confusion surrounding some of his statements from earlier in the week, where Marco Rubio implicated that it was basically Israel that forced America's hand to take the effort to try to reduce the dangers from the nation of Iran. And speaking to reporters, he was finding it frustrating to try to make his point. Here is Secretary of State Marco Rubio, clip 3.
Let me explain to you guys this in simple English. Okay? Iran is run by lunatics, religious fanatic lunatics. They have an ambition to have nuclear weapons. They intend to develop those nuclear weapons behind a program of missiles and drones and terrorism that the world will not be able to touch them for fear of those things. And this is the weakest they've ever been. Now is the time to go after them. The president made the decision to go after them, take away their missiles, take away their navy, take away their drones, take away their ability to make those things so that they can never have a nuclear weapon. That's why the president made this decision. It was the right decision. And the world will be a safer place when these radical clerics no longer have access to these weapons. You see how they're using them now. Imagine how they would use them a year from now if they had more of these.
Okay, that, it seems to me, is a powerful point. And the idea that the world is a safer place today than it was last week at this time before the American assault, that it seems to me is a powerful, powerful argument. Marco Rubio sparring with Manu Raju on CNN about his previous statements concerning Iran and Israel. This is clip 2.
Her quote is about, we knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that would precipitate an attack.
Yeah, no, I understand. But listen,
forces.
all right, but let me understand.
And that's what...
but I had a very specific question from that gentleman, right?
The president said that...
Hold on one second. I asked
he may have forced Israelis.
Okay, but let me answer, because this is my press conference.
Sure.
Okay. You asked me, I was asked a very specific question. So you guys can misrepresent it, but I was asked a very specific question yesterday. The bottom line is this. The president determined we were not going to get hit first. It's that simple, guys. We are not going to put Americans' troops in harm's way. If you tell the president of the United States that if we don't go first, we're going to have more people killed and more people injured, the president's going to go first. That's what he did. That's what the president will always do. He will always put the safety and security of our men and women in uniform and of all Americans before anything else. He's always going to do that. And that's what he did here.
Okay, again, to debate the decision on going to war, it's one of the great weaknesses of the opposition to the war, which is going to be climaxed by a Senate vote. The Senate voting today, the House voting tomorrow on a war powers resolution that would force the president to bring an end to military operations within 60 days. So we're not talking about an immediate end to the war. For people who are Iran sympathizers, that's not going to happen. So what will happen, and how could one answer the question in a more sobering way that President Trump was asked? What is the worst case scenario regarding this war? This and more, considering also a delusion about Iran that Danielle Pletka thinks is very dangerous. That and more coming up in this greatest nation on God's green earth.
Here's a special discount, 50% off just for being a MedHead annual member. Join today at michaelmedved.com.